Hello and welcome to our Euro 96 review, the year that football almost came home. How are you, Sam? First of all, we'll get the niceties out of the way.
Yeah, no, I'm not bad, thank you. Coping well. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Made all the better for ITV, blessing us with this tournament, bringing it back. Not that I've seen it before, so that makes it even better, actually. But yeah,
Yeah,
so they kicked things off. We'll get straight into it because basically the premise of this is we haven't actually seen the games before in full, minimal amounts of highlights really, and we're just going to go through each of the England games for each game day. So the first one they played was the opener. They played it. Well, they showed it. When did they show it again? Was it yesterday?
they showed it on the 11th. Yeah, yesterday.
So the 11th ITV showed it, and they're going day by day, and we're basically just going to go through each England game and sort of round you up on the rest. So we'll kick things off with the England-Switzerland game, which I've just finished watching, nice and prepared. I watched the first half twice, bizarrely. I forgot I'd watched the first half already, and then I watched it twice in one evening. So first half, I'm set. Second half, I'm knowledge maybe a little bit hazy. But should we get straight into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Cool. So yeah, England first ever game first game of Euro 96, 8th of June 1996, 3 o'clock kickoff at the old Wembley, and it was a 1-1 draw in the end. And we'll go through it in more detail later. But overall, on the balance of the game, do you think that was a fair result?
Yeah, definitely. We didn't deserve anything like more than a draw from that game. I think a point is fair for both sides, and Switzerland deserved something. So I think it's a fair result.
Yeah, no, completely. I've got to agree with you on that. And as I say, this particular game I've literally seen none of before, and it was strange because trying to avoid the cliche, it was literally a game of two halves. It was England dominating the first half, but Switzerland able to kind of contain them mainly from going on and scoring three or four, and then Switzerland actually came out in the second half looking like the better team. But we'll just quickly run you through the England team. So you start with David Seaman in goal, a 21-year-old Gary Neville at right back, a centre-half partnership with Tony Adams and Gareth Southgate, with Stuart Pearce at 34 at left back. Central midfield, holding more was Paul Ince, and then maybe playing a bit more box-to-box was Paul Gascoigne. Right mid was Darren Anderton. Left wing was Steve McManaman, and up top were Teddy Sheringham and Alan Shearer. So on paper, Sam, a quality team.
Yeah, certainly. On paper, a very good team. However, I do question some of the selection choices.
Go on.
I so in the Venables had a lot of people accused him of being biased towards players from one of his former clubs, Spurs, and I don't I think he had an amazing career and he did have a good season, but I don't think that Sheringham should have necessarily started up front with Shearer. I think in the last season, I think that it was Shearer who's top scorer in the Prem, then Fowler, then Les Ferdinand, and I think that after Dwight York, Sheringham was fifth. I might be wrong, and I just feel like Les Ferdinand and Shearer. I just feel like it would be a better combination because they'd played together at Newcastle. I'm not sure if that was before this tournament, but they had a partnership, and I feel like they'd have played better up front. As I don't feel like Sheringham had a great game, to be honest.
He didn't. He looked kind of sluggish in the majority of the game. He didn't really give that. It was probably not helped by the fact that he's a young Shearer, who's notorious for giving the centre halves a torrid time of it and Sheringham more just popping out with those sort of classy finishes. And it wasn't really the kind of game that he could get into. I mean, he did miss two big chances in quick succession, did Sheringham, at the start of the game, but we'll go through that in a little more detail later. But yeah, no, I do agree with you, because we probably couldn't have gone with one up top simply because at that point in his career, Shearer worked better in a two. That Shearer and Sutton, a historic striking partnership. But maybe with even Fowler, but yeah, Les Ferdinand probably would have been the best option to bring that experience up top with him. At the time, he was at Newcastle, and then Shearer was at Blackburn. But yeah, no, they did end up playing together. So yeah, that could have. I think as a whole, he probably got it right. Maybe aside from that, it was obviously a little bit of a shock at the time to leave out David Platt, who was England's captain at the time. And Adams took the armband for this game just because he wanted to go with the wingers of Anderson and McManaman. And we'll go on to their overall performance individually in more detail. But it worked out in the end because, especially in that first half, and McManaman particularly, he was electric. And playing with wingers did cause Switzerland problems early on. But no, England, they started the game very brightly. As we say, first half, they had a few good chances, but nothing major. I think Stuart Pearce had a shot from like 30 yards out that whistled over. McManaman cut in, had one saved, then went out, I think, to... Who was it went out to? It went out to someone in the box, basically. They had quite a few good chances, and they finally broke through with a classy finish from Shearer. And that was his first time he scored in a while, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah, it was his first goal. He hadn't scored in the previous 12 games, and his first goal since September '94, which is almost 2 years, which is mad.
Yeah.
Yeah, internationally, that is.
Yeah, no, completely. He was I don't know, because I listened to the commentary, and this was out there in the context of Shearer not scoring for a while and Sheringham being a bit older. But the commentators, was it Brian Moore and Kevin Keegan?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they were saying that England didn't really have any kind of proven goal scorer. And I was sat there thinking, they've got Alan Shearer up top with Teddy Sheringham, and then Robbie Fowler and Les Ferdinand on the bench. Surely one of those has to be classed as a proper goal scorer. But I guess at the time, especially internationally, none of them were. And yeah, and then it's quite good because Shearer goes on to be top scorer in the tournament, so he sort of cements his place as that main striker. But it was just interesting just to hear the commentary team just talking about legendary strikers like that in a non-prolific strike. It was weird, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was weird because these players, with they're some of the biggest names biggest strikers to come out of English football. Like some of these players are just remembered as Premier League legends. So to hear them talked about as if like they're not that prolific for their country, it's quite interesting, really.
Yeah, it's certainly a strange one. But I think so that first half, obviously with the opening game of a tournament, obviously you've got the whole palaver around the opening ceremony, and you've got all the formalities that come before it. One of them that I mentioned to you earlier was Sir Alex Ferguson and Kevin Keegan stood outside London, and Keegan genuinely looked like he hated Ferguson. It was quite funny. They tried to sort of kiss and make up, and Keegan was having absolutely none of it. That was pretty funny. But yeah, aside from the formalities, there's so much for Switzerland. I'd say there's no real pressure going into this game. Maybe on the manager, sure, but on the players, you're going into a game that you're underdogs in anyway, and it's against the home nation in the opening game. All the pressure's on them. So I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
it's probably ideal situation.
I agree. Like, other than the Switzerland weren't really expected to get much out of this game. Like England had previously beat them in the months leading up to the tournament, I think 3-1,
Yeah,
possibly in a friendly, and it's just Switzerland weren't known as a big team then. They've had previously some big players, but they weren't as big as England, who won the tournament favourites. Like in the lead up to the tournament, I don't remember who it was, but one of the managers was like, there are 12 teams that could win this tournament, and England are one of them.
yeah.
So there's no pressure on Switzerland, and it definitely worked to their advantage.
Completely, yeah. Because that first half, they were able to basically play it perfectly. They contained England very well, despite going 1-0 down. There was a shout for offside in that goal, and because the coverage is quite old, they don't really show an extensive amount of replays. Did you remember seeing it definitively if it was offside or not?
I'm pretty sure it was offside. I'm like 75% sure it
Yeah,
was offside. But England goals that are offside, they get given. So
exactly.
um, I yeah, it was offside.
It probably was, yeah. But I mean, hey ho, it's been a while now. So and it was 1-1 in the end. So Switzerland can't have too much to complain on that front. Yeah, no, it was Arthur George, their coach at the time, and he'd taken over from Roy Hodgson of all people, who left a year before the tournament started, and he wasn't popular with the Swiss fans at all. But in this game, I'd say certainly first half, well, the whole game really, but first half, in terms of trying to contain the attacking threat that England posed, I mean, they completely pocketed Darren Anderton and Teddy Sheringham. It was just about the other side, Shearer and McManaman, and Gascoigne when he was sort of marauding forwards. They weren't able to contain as well. But yeah, I mean, who was your? So we'll go on to talk about them a little bit more. But who in that first half sort of stood out for you?
My standout player in the first half was Southgate. For me, in that first, I know McManaman was probably a close second because McManaman was great, like driving at defenders. However, I feel like he lacked a bit of end product. Meanwhile, Gareth Southgate at the back he bailed us out on like several occasions after like defensive errors, and he probably saved us about 2 goals in that first half. And yeah, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. I thought he he did what he needed to do. He never tried to be too tricky. He never tried to play a complicated pass. If he needed to hoof it out, he'd hoof it out. He just was. He just had a really great first half, really solid from a centre back.
Yeah, no, he did. I completely agree. He was great first half, and even when Adams was caught out every now and again with the ball, he'd come in and bail him out. I think there was one point where Adams got turned by that Turk Yilmaz, who we'll go on.
Yeah,
We'll talk about the Swiss team a little bit more. Obviously, not in quite as much detail, but he'd turned Adams. I think when Southgate came in and got rid of it. And bear in mind, Southgate wasn't the senior sort of centre half in this team. It was Adams that was taking the reins, so he performed very well. But for me, you touched on it a little bit there. My standout performer throughout the 70 minutes that he played, and we'll talk about the second half decisions in a minute. But McManaman was so electric, and this is probably my slight ignorance towards it because I never realised quite how good McManaman was. I knew he had hot and cold days, and I knew that on his day he could be properly good, but I'd never seen that much footage of him, in honest truth. And this was probably the first time I'd seen him play without sort of highlights and bad parts taken out. And every time he was running at the Swiss right back, I can't remember his name now, but every time he was running down that left-hand side, he'd cause havoc. And that's what defenders hate. If you're running at them, he'd constantly do that. And on that left-hand side, it gave him an opportunity to cut in on his right. And he was brilliant, honestly. His end product admittedly did leave a little bit left to be desired. He did have one decent shot, but aside from that, he was probably our main threat aside from Shearer when he got his opportunity in that first half. And he really stepped up to the plate despite only being 24, which is, I mean, you're prime, but you're not as old as a lot of the other players like Gascoigne, Ince. He really stepped up and sort of carried the load for England, especially in that first half, attacking wise, I'd say. But yeah, it was just a shame to see him brought off so early, really.
yeah, no, he was great, and he came back. He came in off the back of a great Premier League season. He got the most assists in the Premier League. He got 15 assists that season, and yeah, he looked like a threat, and you could kind of tell. You could see why he got so many assists because he literally just gets the ball, beats about like 2 or 3 men, and then will just deliver a cross. And despite the fact that not all the crosses are like inch perfect or like, but he does it like so much and like so consistently that there's always going to be like 1 or 2 balls that will drop perfectly to like a forward.
Yeah, because I was trying to think about it. When I was watching that first half for the second time, a player at the minute that I could compare him to, because he's actually got quite a bit of height about him. I didn't realise how sort of kind of lanky he was as well, but he's also got that pace. And someone that on their day is a world-class talent, but when not really with it, it can just get hauled off like nothing's happened and you won't really notice. And it's tricky. I can't think of any modern-day comparisons for a Steve McManaman type.
No.
Especially in the England squad as well. I mean, the only slight comparison you could make, and obviously not the height front, would be Raheem Sterling. Because on his day, he's a world-class talent. But his end product, as similarly to McManaman, can sometimes leave a little bit to be desired.
I'd agree. I think Sterling is probably the closest player you get to it, despite the fact that he's definitely worked on his end product and he's a lot better. He does go through games where you're just like, you just kind of like ignore him in a way, or you just don't really realise he's there. So because at Man City, he's surrounded by so many great players that can outshine him. And sometimes, like, on his day, he outshines, like, he can outshine a De Bruyne, he can outshine a Aguero. But then if he's not on his game, then he's just like not there at all.
That is certainly similar. That's probably the closest you could get to a McManaman type nowadays. So in terms of Seaman, I thought throughout the game played very well. The few saves that he had to make, and the thing with me, obviously being an Arsenal fan, I've seen a lot of David Seaman play. Admittedly, not again in my lifetime in his prime, but he gives you that calming presence because he's one of the most chilled keepers. You see goalkeepers now, like a Jordan Pickford, for example, going mental at his defenders in goal, right? You would never see that from David Seaman. He was always the calmest man on the pitch, whatever happened. And he definitely brought that calming influence to a couple of young players in that back four, like a Gary Neville and a Southgate at the time. But yeah, first half, England going in 1-0. But you felt like it was still on sort of tenterhooks, didn't you think?
Yeah, no, you're right. It was, even in that first half, Switzerland still had their chances. Like, there were a few instances where, like, again, Southgate bailed us out, but it did look like we needed like a few more goals just to really like push on and get away from this Swiss side.
Yeah, because Grassi, I think it was about half an hour in, maybe just before the half time, hit the bar from like 4 yards out. The ball was drilled into him from Turkey Yilmaz, and he got almost too good of a connection on it. Hit the bar, and then I distinctly remember the ball coming back out. And I can't remember exactly who it was on the edge of the box, but he was going to volley it, and the ref just stood right in front of him, and he had to get round him. And there was a clip of him just afterwards, fully berating the ref. But they did have their chances, Switzerland.
Yeah,
Yeah, go on.
That the Grassi chance was like he literally had an open goal. I mean, Turkey Yilmaz literally just absolutely had Pierce on toast. He absolutely like destroyed him, almost sent him into retirement, and he should have scored. It is a sitter. I know it's it can be a hard one, but he's got to score that in my mind.
Yeah, I think I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He definitely should have scored, but to play devil's advocate, he was stretching quite a bit. I think it was Adams that was also going in with him, as well as Neville. I think he had a couple of players coming in with him, and he was stretching. But yeah, the only criticism would be he got almost too good of a contact on it, because if he scuffs that just sort of trickles in. But he got a solid contact on it, came back off the bar, and England were able to clear it. But overall, first half, how do you think England looked as a unit?
Looked all right. I feel like there was, I feel end product kind of lacking. We looked reasonably comfortable. It just, I don't know. We just looked like the players didn't look like they were on the same wavelength. So it looked like, so for example, McManaman would get the ball and then he'd cut it back to the edge of the box, but Shearer would have made a run to the front post, for example. So like they just weren't like clicking completely, and that happens on like the first game. It's your first game of the tournament. You're not necessarily 100% in the zone yet, but I just felt like the players were on the same wavelength.
Yeah, that's certainly a point that I bring up, because they looked comfortable enough in possession, but when they tried to make something happen, it was give it to McManaman and nothing else. I mean, Gascoigne made the odd run, but it was mainly from the deeper midfield to attacking midfield, and then he'd spray out to McManaman or Anderton. Getting the ball into the two strikers was my main criticism of the first half, because giving them that service, admittedly, we did get a goal from it, thanks to, I think, Paul Ince headed it into Shearer. But overall, excuse me, we looked comfortable with possession when it was a little bit deeper and when it was just playing it around midfield. But it was just that cutting edge that you talk about that we lacked. And that was why, for me, McManaman was so valuable, was because he was the only one really willing to make those attacking runs and actually, give Switzerland some problems. But yeah, as a whole, defensively, we looked a little bit shaky.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. We looked. There wasn't much defensive organisation. I don't think Adams really. It was his. He of course wasn't the actual captain. Like Platt was the captain, but he was like the standing captain.
Yeah.
And I feel like Adams struggled to organise his defence, and a few of them made some errors, even like the more experienced ones, like Pearce. I don't think was brilliant defensively. Thought he was decent, very decent going forward, but defensively, for a player that I'm pretty sure is known more for his defensive prowess than his going forward, it was quite weird to see that it was the opposite in this game.
Yeah.
And Adams as well, just for the experience, but I feel like they were outshone by the younger players in that defence in Neville and Southgate.
Yeah, those two really did step up, and as much as it does pain me to say that first game, Adams didn't do a good enough job defensively, and he was caught on the ball a little bit. He looks a little bit. He didn't look like a man who had an awful lot of match fitness, which was true going into the game because he hadn't played an awful lot. But yeah, no, as you say, Southgate, Neville, they looked brilliant. Pearce looked, as you say, very shaky defensively. Switzerland regularly going forward had him on toast. They'd sort of target him, you could tell. And Adams did struggle to organise him a bit, but he was bailed out by Southgate quite regularly. Some of the stuff for me defensively, particularly when it got tougher, the going got tougher in the second half, which we'll go on to talk about a little bit more, was Paul Ince. This was a period where he was at Inter Milan, and he was playing some of his best football of his career. And when he was on the ball, first half he looked decent, but second half, when we were stuck in our own half a little bit, he didn't seem like the player that could transition it up the pitch. Gaza, he looked blown from about the hour mark, which was a shame really, because I thought at that point his fitness had improved from the tournaments like Italian 90, for example, where you just get blown out after like half an hour because you just run around like a lunatic. But for me, Ince defensively was key because he'd regularly cut out passes that could have put the likes of Grazia and Turkey Yilmaz through. But he was very good. Him and Gascoigne in that midfield did play very well as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I feel like Ince wasn't like one of those players that was you noticed straight away, but he just kind of like did his job and just kind of got on with it. Of course, he got an assist. He played like a slide through ball to Shearer, but I feel like Ince, he just went about his job and had a good game.
Yeah, he certainly marshalled well in front of the defence, I'd say. He covered for quite a lot of their mistakes, similar to Southgate. So first half, 1-0 up. England looking competent. I wouldn't say comfortable, but competent. Looking like a team that hadn't played an awful lot of time together as a unit and were going into a major tournament where there's loads of pressure on them. Second half, the wheels started to come off a little bit, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it was like it was like nervous. Everyone was just like misplacing passes, and Switzerland just really capitalised and really started to come into the game.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. This is where I struggle a little bit because so we came into the second half, and you could kind of tell that we were nervous from the get go, and I want to know what Venables said at half time to them, because I mean maybe it's just naturally how the game was going to pan out anyway, but maybe you'd have liked to see him. I don't know, not necessarily make a change at half time, make a change early on when he realised that it wasn't quite going to plan. And he made that change in the form of bringing off our biggest attacking threat, which I didn't quite get. It was sort of 70th minute. And he brings off, let me get this right, because I can't remember exactly who he bought off, because he bought off, he made a double substitution, didn't he? So he bought
off Sheringham and McManaman for Stone and Barmby.
Yeah. That was it. So yeah, and that was basically for the purpose of putting Anderson out onto the left, wasn't it? So
yeah,
and I don't know, maybe this is similar to what he said earlier, because Anderson at the time was playing for Spurs, and the commentary team didn't, despite having a poor game in my opinion, didn't seem they seemed fairly confident that he wasn't going to bring off Anderson whatever the cost. And that put the team at detriment. I mean, you can make the argument that he's trying to save McManaman for the Scotland and the Holland game. And his second half wasn't as impactful as his first half, but he still had that attacking threat. And it was a game that was crying out for a second England goal if we were to go on and win it. And we just didn't get it.
Yeah, it's true. I thought, in the 95-96 season, Anderson was kind of like missed a lot of it through injury. And there was some surprise when he was called up to the tournament, but he just had a really poor game. The commentators were talking about how, and it's true, like there are games where he's just he's been quiet, but then just pops up with a goal or a really important goal or assist and like a moment of magic. But he he didn't look like he was going to do it at all in this match.
Yeah.
I was very surprised when he didn't get bought off and it was McManaman. I mean, I think Anderson could have been taken off at half time. Never mind not taken off at all. He just was very poor, and I don't really agree with who came on either, to be quite honest.
No, it seemed like a safe choice. At that point, it didn't really seem like, and it's the 70th minute, and it wasn't as if we completely had our backs up against the wall at that point. It was like we were struggling to get a foothold in the second half, and bringing on Stone into that right wing position seemed like the safe choice. It seemed like, okay, he's a bit more up and down the wing, whereas whoever Anderson out on that right is more of a mercurial kind of player and isn't going to work back as much. Whereas Stone was always naturally going to do that, had a bit more experience. I think he was playing for Leeds at the time. I can't remember exactly. And it was
Forest.
Was it Forest who was
Yeah.
at the time?
Yeah, Forest.
Well, I was close. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, for keeping Anderton on, it wasn't the sort of game, as you say, that he could really pop up with that moment of magic, because we just simply didn't have enough of the ball in their half. If it was a game where we were having a lot of the ball in their half, it was a lot of working it around the box, but not quite having that killer edge, and McManaman wasn't quite doing it, fine. But McManaman wasn't playing particularly poorly, and Anderton was. So yeah, it did seem like a strange position. The commentary team said at the time, and it's a weird one for me.
I feel like Anderton should have been taken off, but I think that Nick Barmby should have taken over from Anderton. So I think that Nick Barmby is more of a winger than a striker, and I think he'd been more effective on that right hand side, and then maybe brought on a young Robbie Fowler or a Les Ferdinand who'd have been more effective up front.
Yeah, that would have made more sense. I guess the only thing that Venables is thinking at that point, and you can tell from the two substitutions, is that he's trying to hold on to this 1-0 lead, because he's realising that we're just not having the build-up play that's going to be able to get a Les Ferdinand or a Robbie Fowler in the game. So maybe if he brings on Barmby, he brings more of a defensive threat. But it was two very negative substitutions. And I think maybe tactically he got it wrong, although if we had gone for it, there was more of a chance that we'd lose, because Switzerland were just playing their way into the game. Who stood out for you particularly in that Swiss team?
In that Swiss team, it had to be there. I think both of their centre backs in Henschels and Vega were good. Henschels, of course, would go on to play for Liverpool and be a very solid defender for Liverpool. But I feel like Vega really stood out for me. He was just a really commanding performance. He kept Shearer and Sheringham quite quiet. I mean, I know Shearer got the goal, but considering how they were both brilliant strikers, maybe Sheringham not had the best season of his career, but he still scored 16 goals, and he was at 30 years old. You consider that probably one in his prime. So considering that, I think that Vega did a great job to keep him quiet. He controlled that. Unlike Tony Adams in this game, I feel like he had a decent control of his back line, and if the roles had been reversed, then I think that England could have scored past Tony Adams at the back.
Yeah, I agree. They were both very good, as you say. Vega, yeah, commented on him, very strong at the back. Shares the name of the ref, which the commentator speculated if there was any relation there, but quickly dispelled. But yeah, no, Switzerland looked defensively solid throughout the game, whereas England really didn't have that defensive solidarity throughout. Of course, with Switzerland, what brought them back into the game was the striking partnership of Grazzi and Turk Yilmaz. Turk Yilmaz particularly, I thought, looked fantastic. And we'll go into our man of the match at the end, but he was close to being mine because he was very good. Scored the penalty, obviously, which we'll go on again to discuss. But yeah, as a whole, defensively, they were always solid. And going forward, they always had that threat. Despite the Swiss fans being annoyed that they didn't bring on Chapuisat, the Dortmund striker. They were literally singing, weren't they singing Chappie at one point? At
Yeah, they
the
were.
50th minute. It had been 5 minutes since half time and they were still singing it. But he got bought on eventually. He looked okay, but as a whole, Switzerland's main threat did come through Turk Yilmaz and Grazzi up top. But yeah, defensively, as we say, they were quality. But should we talk about the Switzerland goal on the penalty?
Yeah, the penalty was given for a handball by Stuart Pearce. At the time, the commentators described it as harsh, which is I could see that side of it because the ball was kicked and hit his arm between a meter or two. It was the ball was so close to him when it hit his arm. It was blatantly hit his arm, and I could see why at the time it was thought that was harsh. But at the same time, his arms are here, and if that's an unnatural position for me. Like, why? What's he doing? He's not on a roller coaster. He's not. What are they doing up here? Keep him down. So I think it's his own fault for having his arms in a really stupid position.
Yeah, it was certainly the definition of an unnatural position because no one's going up and sort of flailing them about like that. It was careless and probably avoidable as well. I think that's what you got to take into question considering the distance between the initial shot that comes in on the handball. Referee gives it, probably rightfully so, as we say. And yeah, Turkey almost what's the word? Discards of the penalty? Is that what I mean?
Disperse,
No, not disperse. What word do I mean?
dispatch.
Dispatches. There we go. Yeah, we got it at the same time. Dispatches of the penalty. And yeah, made it 1-1. And even from there, I mean, Switzerland looks like the better team after the goal because part of me was thinking at that point, okay, they might rein it in a little. They're playing against a team they're not necessarily expected to beat. They might, bring it back a little bit, start parking the bus and go back to their first half tactics. But fair game to them. I mean, they continue to absolutely pummel us.
They really did, and that's something that England should have probably exposed. They continued to go forward, but we just didn't. We they'd grabbed a draw, and you're thinking, right, England are going to go at them really hard for the last 10 minutes or however long was left. But we didn't. We almost sat back and just tried to make sure it wasn't a loss, which is I just don't think that was the right mentality. Fair play to Arthur George and their manager. I thought he got a game I don't think there was anything he did wrong in that game. I thought it was perfect game
Yeah,
plan.
he certainly he judged the temperature of the game perfectly. I'd say I don't know. It's a tricky one for me. So part of me, and maybe this is because we're looking at it in retrospect and we know what happened. The majority of what happened goes on to happen afterwards. But part of me thinks that it might have been the right decision later in that second half, as he does. Obviously, not maybe bringing off McManaman, but when he brings on Platt for Gascoigne, for example, he didn't come on and play brilliantly, but he's a similar mould player. He's a similar type of player, a ball carrier. So part of me thinks that sitting back and holding out for the 1-1 draw in the last few minutes was probably the best decision, considering that we simply just weren't breaking through Switzerland's defence, especially as it's the opening game of the tournament. And if you lose that, that's it, really. I mean, if you lose the opening game of the tournament in a group with Scotland and the Netherlands, it's never going to be easy. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one because you got to weigh up risk and reward, and that's obviously a manager's job entirely. But I don't think it was the worst decision he could have made. But I think part of me would have certainly liked to see him. Okay, we've gone one. It's 1-1 now. We need to try and throw the kitchen sink at them, and they didn't really do that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, but in my opinion, a draw against Switzerland, the first game of the tournament, you need to get the whole nation behind you. The media were on their backs, as they always are with England. You need to get them off your backs. You need to get a win, and a 1-1 draw against Switzerland isn't going to do that because they're well, we've drawn against a team that's worse than us because they are worse than us. They were worse than us, a team. So it's I feel like Venables, because Venables before the tournament said that this would be his last tournament as he was involved in a load of media speculation and court cases, and I feel like he should have just got really pushed for a win, just because then at least if we'd lost 2-1, the nation would have seen, well, at least we're trying to play football the right way. At least with our managers gone for the kill.
Yeah, no, that is true because that would have. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Thinking about it, and obviously what we know since going for trying to get that last goal, and if they had got it, obviously would have fully put everyone behind the team. But if we'd have conceded, there would have been that element of okay, Terry Venables can't manage the last dying embers of games, and we'd probably be looking at it the other way around. So it's a tricky one to weigh up. But I partly agree with you on the fact that it would have been good just to try and play football in that second half, because we didn't. We could barely string a pass together in the second half. Gaza, as I say, got hauled off in the 77th minute, and rightfully so. Second half he was poor. First half he was very good. He was vintage Gaza. But that's what comes with playing in Scotland, really, doesn't it? But overall, he as results go, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly doesn't set you up well for a massive game against Scotland and a massive game against the Netherlands.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It wasn't. It was far from the perfect start, but it wasn't the worst start at the same time.
Yeah. Shall we discuss who we think our two man of the matches are?
Yeah, shall I start?
Crack on, mate.
My man of the match, I mentioned about him in the second half. It's going to be the Swiss centre back Vega. I just think in this game, he was just brilliant. First half, he was good. Second half, he really stepped up, even when it didn't even look like he could get any better. But he did. He was just commanding, keeping Shearer and Sheringham quiet, which is no easy task. And England didn't look like scoring, and he was a huge reason behind that. And of course, after this tournament, later got a move to Italy, and then later a move to Spurs. So his brilliant performance in this game definitely caught a few eyes.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. He was great, as we touched upon earlier. Part of me wanted to go with Turk Yilmaz, and then I heard you'd gone with a Swiss player as well. So I was like, I should probably keep the English element to this podcast. So I'm going with McManaman for the 70 minutes that he played, because he was the best player on that pitch for the whole of the first half and parts of the second half where he looked good. Other than that, for England, I struggled to pick anyone out. I mean, maybe Southgate you could pick out. Shearer actually got man of the match for his goal, which, yeah, I mean, it was a good goal, don't get me wrong, and it was good for him to break his duck, so maybe he deserved that just on the basis of him actually being able to score, unlike any other England players. But I'd personally go McManaman just because of how electric he was in that first half. And when he puts in a performance like that, it really makes you sit back and go, wow, yeah, he's something special. And he went on to play for Real Madrid a couple of seasons after that, was it? Or was it literally the season afterwards? I can't remember exactly.
I'm not sure. I think it was a few years after. I feel like it was like 2 years after, maybe. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, we don't know. So he went on to play for them at some point, and yeah, he got man of the match in the Champions League final as well. So he can have those games where he just takes over, and this was one of those games until the second half, and Venables then took him off, so I didn't really give him a chance to get back into the game. Whereas I feel if we'd have had him on for the last 20 minutes of the game, we'd have had a far greater chance of scoring, because he still could be able to pop up with that one moment of taking it round their full back and putting it into Shearer, and it's 2-1 and we're all going happy. Whereas the likelihood of that happening with Nick Barmby on the pitch is fairly slimmer than it is Steve McManaman. But yeah, I mean, onwards and upwards for England, it seems, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, of course we know what happened next, but yeah, despite not having a great start, not the worst, and I don't think it necessarily. It definitely didn't necessarily knock the confidence, and if anything, it inspired this England team to prove people wrong.
Yeah. No, completely. So England go on to play Scotland in the next game. I believe that's over the weekend. ITV are showing over the weekend. So I think it might be the Sunday. I can't remember exactly when it is. But that'll be an interesting game to review, because we've all seen, well, we've all seen the one goal, that Gaza goal, and we'll obviously talk about that a lot. But it's more around the occasion, and coming out of a fairly disappointing result like this to Switzerland, it is certainly on the England team to go out there and prove a point against an old rival.
Yeah, no, I agree. After this performance, England need to come out the blocks flying. They really need to do, and just manage the game better. But definitely a lot of lessons learnt from this Switzerland game. that they could use against Scotland, who at this time weren't as bad as they are now. Because right
No.
now they are shocking. But back then they were all right.
Yeah, I'm giving them a hard rep. They didn't have a bad team. No, well, not a terrible team in there. And they had Hansen. They had what's his name? He was a bit older at the time. What's his name? Played for Liverpool. McAllister.
Dalglish. Oh, I was going to say that was quite a while before then.
little bit past his time. Yeah. I do. We'll probably wrap it up soon. But there is one thing that I want to leave you on, because I haven't been able to bring it up yet in the podcast, and I think you know what it is, because there was one point in the second half where we're making those first substitutions. It's at the same time that Switzerland are, and it's just funny to listen to it back now, because we were never in an era where manual boards for the fourth officials were used, and Kevin Keegan fully moans and has a rant about the electronic boards for fourth officials, and he uses the exact quote, "a new machine," which is, it's just so strange to hear, because it's just so out of the realms of our imagination that that's a new machine at any point in any era.
It was so weird. It was funny though, the way that he was just like, I don't understand why we need to use these new these new machines and stuff. Or
Yeah.
it was definitely a funny moment. But yeah, they're definitely more efficient now than they were in '96.
Yeah, I think it's because people know how to use them now. Whereas before, Keegan rightly points out, the fourth official has no idea really what he's doing. But yeah, that was. It's just, it is strange, because obviously, as we said many times, it's a good 5 years before we were born. This tournament happened, and to imagine a tournament of that scale taking place in London is only really comparable to the Olympics, but that's spread out over different venues. This was at one stadium in London. It was at Wembley. I mean, well, the England games were being played there. And it's just, it's unimaginable if that were to happen now. And it'd be just so amazing, because you hear the atmosphere prior to the game, the singing of the national anthem, just everything about it just makes me miss football more, really.
Yeah, well, that's the 2021 Euros, because England are playing all their games at Wembley, aren't they?
That is
So
true. Yes, of course.
maybe we're gonna have that feeling next year when it eventually happens. And if we get to the finals at Wembley, and
Yeah,
so
well,
the semi-finals.
yeah, both semi-finals and final are at Wembley, aren't they? So if we get to the
Yeah.
same stage, oh my God, imagine if it's Southgate managing a semi-final of the Euros against Germany at Wembley and it goes to penalties.
And we win.
That'd be awful.
And we win.
I don't think I could cope. But anyway, we're rambling and we're talking about what's going to happen, whereas we need to talk about that in the next few podcasts. So think we'll leave it there, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about with the England-Switzerland game.
No, sounds like we've wrapped up all of it.
Sounds good. Well, we're going to be back for the England-Scotland game. We'll talk about that in some greater detail, I'd imagine, just because it's a bigger game. But yeah, we'll also take you through the general direction of the rest of the tournament and how everyone else is getting on, the major teams, major results, that sort of thing. But at this point, obviously, this is the opening game, so there aren't any to do. So stay tuned. It's ITV4. They're showing every day of every game of Euro 96. And we will be reviewing every England game. So as soon as you've watched that England game, the next day, hop on over and we'll have a juicy podcast up for you, similar to this one. So yeah, that's it, really, isn't it? So
yeah,
cheers. Thank you very much. And yeah, be back for the England-Scotland game, the aftermath.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.